Rwandan genocide was caused by the deep divisions between the Hutu and Tutsi people. But the reason this genocide became so prolific and deadly was because of the inadequate international response. The year was 1986, and Colonel Romeo Dallaire had just been newly appointed as the director of the Canadian Army's Equipment and Research Program. As director, Romeo Dallaire would make several white paper proposals to the Canadian government, seeking to increase military funding. These proposals would be deemed by the Canadian government as far too expensive, and would subsequently be denied. But this story isn't about Dallaire's failed request for better military funding. This is about Dallaire's denied request for UN support in Rwanda, a rejection whose consequences would prove far more deadly. Rwanda was a small but populous country in Central Africa. For a time, the country stayed out of global headlines, but that does not mean it was without its problems. Deep divisions lay between the ethnic majority, the Hutus, and the minority population, the Tutsis. Intermittent violence was common between these groups. The lines separating the two ethnic groups of Rwanda were sharpened during Rwanda's period of colonial rule. Germany governed Rwanda from 1894 until the end of the First World War, when German East Africa was dissolved and split between the victorious European powers. Rwanda then came under the control of Belgium, and Belgium would govern Rwanda until 1962, when the country gained its independence. During Rwanda's period of colonialism, the colonial powers would support the ruling Tutsi monarchy, and this monarchy became a symbol of colonialism to the Rwandan population. Following Rwanda gaining its sovereignty, the Rwandans would have their first ever election. Not surprisingly, the Hutu majority would win this election. The Hutu regime would stay in power for the next 3 decades. Under this regime, Tutsis felt they had no political representation, and the hostility between these groups would intensify. In the early 1990s, tensions would boil over into civil war, when a rebel group called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, who wanted the Tutsi people to have more political autonomy, invaded Rwanda. The fighting would go on for 3 years, until the United Nations brokered a peace agreement between these two groups. During this war, government officials began putting blame on the Tutsi minority for the conflict. It was at this time that the international peacekeeping community got involved. The UN decided to create the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda. The purpose of this mission was to maintain the ceasefire between the Rwandan government and the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Canada would have a strong hand in this operation. At this time, Canada was becoming more involved in international peacekeeping missions. This operation would be led by Canadians Brigadier General Romeo Dallaire and his right-hand man, Officer Major Brent Beardsley. However, the real strength of this operation was limited because the mission did not have the mandate to use any force and only incorporated 81 unarmed military observers. In the following months, tensions in Rwanda would mount. Hutu extremists in the government began a propaganda campaign calling for violent action against the Tutsi minority. The country was on the brink of civil war and only needed one more push to erupt into violence. Romeo Dallaire saw the signs that genocide would be imminent and warned the United Nations. Dallaire's pleas for more troops and the mandate to take preemptive action would be ignored, and the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda would get no more resources to counter the impending disaster. On the return flight from a meeting of African leaders, the airplane carrying the president of Rwanda and the president of neighboring Burundi was shot down by a missile of unknown origin. The missile could have been launched by either the Rwandan Patriotic Front or Hutu extremists working in the government, who were unhappy with the negotiation of the peace deal. However, the origin of the missile didn't matter. The result was the same. The Rwandan government announced that the Rwandan Patriotic Front launched the missile, and the government would use this as justification for beginning a violent campaign of persecution against the Tutsis. The crimes carried out against the Tutsis were appalling. The Rwandan government would attempt an extermination of the Tutsi people to a horrific extent. Government soldiers and violent Hutu gangs would murder every Tutsi civilian they could, along with any Hutu moderates who opposed the slaughter. The most feared gangs were the Interahamwe, a machete-wielding, government-sponsored militia. The tactics of the Interahamwe include numerous war crimes, including the use of child soldiers and mass murder. The United Nations Assistance Mission to Rwanda was powerless to prevent the genocide. Still, the courageous actions of troops saved countless lives, helping Rwandans and foreign nationals to find safety or escape the country. This experience would deeply scar the troops trying to help the Rwandans. Canadians on this mission would develop post-traumatic stress disorder at a higher rate than any other Canadian peacekeeping mission. In the face of the genocide, the United Nations Assistance Mission would fall apart. 10 Belgian troops were ambushed by government forces. The government soldiers would torture and then murder these men. The Belgian government was so appalled by these murders that they decided to withdraw their troops from Rwanda. This started the erosive process of the United Nations Assistance Mission's capacity to help in Rwanda, as many countries also decided to withdraw their troops. As soldiers left their temporary bases, Interahamwe gangs came to kill the Tutsis sheltering under UN protection. Romeo Dallaire would beg the United Nations for more soldiers, but he would be denied. The insufficient international response cost thousands of lives. Under the pretext of the plight of the Imperial Tutsis, the Rwandan Patriotic Front resumed fighting the government forces. In their campaign, the Rwandan Patriotic Front killed tens of thousands of Hutus in a counter-genocide. By mid-July, after 100 days of fighting, the Rwandan Patriotic Front had taken control of the capital city, Kigali, and assumed full control of the country. The killings ended and the orchestrators of the genocide fled the country. In the end, the genocide had cost 800,000 lives and left millions of more Rwandans homeless, maimed, and traumatized. As many as 2 million Rwandans fled the country, either Tutsis and moderate Hutus trying to escape persecution during the genocide, or Hutus who fled immediately after the genocide, fearing reparation. The ruined and volatile state of the country was a clear sign to the United Nations that more humanitarian work was needed. A second assistance mission was authorized to help distribute medical aid and facilitate refugees re-entering the country. Canada would play a large part in the second assistance mission for Rwanda, as they did during the first assistance mission. This operation would face immense challenges in trying to re-establish some sense of order in Rwanda. The peacekeepers would have to rebuild the trust that was lost between them and the Rwandans, who felt that the United Nations abandoned them in their time of need. The United Nations troops would work hard for the next 6 months to help rebuild basic infrastructure, provide healthcare services, distribute food, and patrol city streets and rural towns. Despite Rwanda's trauma, the country has made great strides in creating a better and more peaceful future. The Rwandan government has made many significant achievements in promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women. In 2023, women held 61% of positions in the Rwandan parliament. The economy of Rwanda is on a steady trajectory of growth, making it one of the most appealing countries for foreign investment. According to the Constitution made in 2003, the government must uphold the eradication of discrimination and divisionism. The objective of the current Rwandan government is to promote national unity. All the deaths, pain, suffering caused by the Rwandan genocide prompt the question, why didn't the UN intervene sooner and with greater resources? Why did they disregard Dallaire's warnings? In 1999, the United Nations held an inquiry to investigate this question. The conclusion was that errors in judgment and a lack of political will by administrators in the United Nations amounted to the failure of the international peacekeeping community to counter the Rwandan genocide. The reputation of the United Nations has been forever besmirched by their neglectful policy to not help more during the genocide.